It's time to talk Cincinnati Bengals on the Our Football Network for the OFN Today. It is the 2023 NFL Draft review video portion of, I guess you could say, the time of season, which is still a pretty great time to be an NFL fan. And for Bengals fans out there, I'm pretty sure they had a great draft. We'll talk about that. We'll go into the draft in depth. And we'll do that, of course, by welcoming in John Sheeran to the program. John, how's it going?
It's going good, Greg. I mean, Bengals had a great draft. I think 31 other teams had a great draft.
True.
It's just a great draft all around, man. It's been great.
I don't know about that. If you're a Bears fan and you think you had a good draft,
well,
I don't know. But
love Darnell Wright.
Yeah. But I did think, as a outside observer, I kind of felt that the players in which the Bengals were able to put on their roster, the talent, and when they got those players seemed to be a pretty good fit. So I think from just this type of, hey, 5 years from now, are we going to be saying this was a good draft? I kind of feel confident we will.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. 8 picks. I feel like they drafted for sure like 2 or 3 future starters. Anything beyond that, I think, is just icing on the cake. You're probably getting a handful of role players to kind of round that out. But it was a good combination of drafting for the future first and then complementing those picks with drafting immediate impact players, because no one really expected them to go defense for the second consecutive year, which has never really happened before in franchise history. But to follow those picks out with offensive playmakers who add an element of speed and explosiveness that was really lacking in terms of just the auxiliary options outside of your starters and Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, the whole trifecta there, just to round out some of those position groups with really athletic depth to go with future cornerstone pieces, or hopefully cornerstone pieces on defense. It was a really good way to draft at the end of the draft order for the second consecutive year.
Taking a look at, and we're going to go into some of the players that also stuck out as far as the UDFAs, but and we're also going to talk a little bit later on about the schedule, which came out yesterday. So we're recording this on Friday the 12th, so that came out yesterday. So we'll talk about a little early reaction on the schedule. But just taking a look, first of all, at Myles Murphy. To get Murphy where the Bengals were able to get him, that's what I thought was really cool. If you're part of the organization and even a fan, I know there was a possibility. I think mock drafts probably had Myles Murphy going to the Bengals, some of them. But I think there were also people who thought Myles Murphy could have gone earlier in the draft. That was one of those players that people were like, where's this guy going to go? Could he go in the top 15? Could he end up as a late first rounder? So I think because he did end up, late first round, and the Bengals needed some additional edge rush help, I think that worked out.
You know what? I was thinking the exact same thing. I was looking at just the strengths of the draft in general. The Bengals were obviously looking at cornerback early, but it wasn't likely that one of the 4 or 5 top guys were going to fall to them. So that led me to think, like, okay, who from another position that the Bengals are looking at, who is likely to fall, which position group is likely to have one guy slip? And, about a week before the draft, I'm thinking, I think defensive end might have a guy who's going to be there, and Myles Murphy kind of fits the bill. So Myles Murphy was my final mock draft prediction for the Bengals first round pick, and sure enough, that's what it ended up being. I think the 28th pick, though, late first, early second, is a more accurate. It should have been a more accurate projection of where Murphy should have gone. I know that he was consensus-wise a top 20 player in this class, but I think there are reasons as to why he lasted that long, on top of just, the draft being random and some guys falling beyond expected. But outside of just obviously a great combination of size and speed and explosiveness, there were, I think, production questions at Clemson. The fact that he really dominated as a freshman and really kind of tapered off after that. Maybe that's just the thing with Clemson players, and maybe because he changed defensive coordinators, or he experienced a defensive coordinator change in his last year. Maybe that had something to do with it. But I thought Murphy was a more imperfect prospect than maybe some people gave him credit for. But to find him at the end of the first, because of that athleticism, because he's still only 21 years old, and you're pairing him with a great defensive coordinator, Lou Arumo, a great defensive line coach, and Marion Hobby, another Clemson guy. So there were ties to the program. I think he landed in arguably the best possible situation for him. And I think because of that, you will probably see a positive return on investment for a late first-round pick and a pass rusher.
Yeah, because we talked last year about the early pick, Zach Carter, along the defensive line. I wasn't really a big fan of that, but look, he might still be a big part of their rotation moving forward. But being able to now do what they needed to do and grab that edge rusher, because Joseph Asai, that was another thing we were unsure about. He came back last year. He played pretty well. Of course, he had the playoff mishap, but still there was, we talked about the possibility of him being a big part of their edge rush moving forward. So now you add Murphy, and that just makes the whole, room, that pass rush room, edge rush room, even that much more deep. And that's exactly what you need in a 4-3 defense. So that really looked good early. And that was one of actually my top needs that I put into the Our draft guide, which is still available. So if anybody out there, and I'm holding up the draft guide because John can't see me, but I'm holding up the draft guide. And if you guys want to order it, just go to rls.com. Link in the description area. You can check that out. So this is actually even maybe a better time if you were thinking, it's over. The draft is over. I missed my window. Well, no, you didn't, because this is the best time to get it, because you know where your players are on your teams and all the teams. So this is still a very valuable piece of information. And the draft review guide comes out in a couple of months. So be on the lookout for that as well, because we'll let you know. I'll let you know how I felt. John's going to be a big part of that. And then all the other teams will be in there, and everything else regarding how the draft went as a whole. But yes, I had edge rush there. My number one, just kind of throwing a wrench into this, didn't get taken, but this happened, I believe. Irv Smith. When was Irv Smith signed? That was late March, correct?
Yeah, it was the last day of March. It was actually the last minute of March.
Yeah. So I know even, yeah. So I'm pretty sure when I was putting my report together, I don't think Irv Smith was a part of it. Just quickly looking at it, no, he wasn't. So that's why I had it, that tight end as a big position of need. But we talked, me and Dave Syvertson from our lads, after or before the draft about the Bengals when they drafted Irv Smith, that we kind of felt that would not now be such a big position of need. And we just did it based on how the Bengals, especially with the new coaching staff, just for whatever reason, I'm not talking about snaps, I'm just talking about who were the tight ends that ended up leading their team in receptions and yardage and things of that nature over the last 3-4 years. And it was pretty much a different tight end every year. And it's like, well, you know what? Maybe that's just the strategy, is they just don't look at this position as, especially with as many receivers as they use in the offense, the tight end spot. Look, it's important, but not as important. And you know what? Maybe Irv Smith is just not a temporary signing. He's still young enough. He could be the long-term answer.
He could, because he's 25 years old. And I think they graded Drew Sample obviously way too high in 2019. And I think Irv Smith was taken a little bit before Drew Sample in that draft in the second round. But they graded Irv Smith at around like where he got picked. So okay. Yeah, like that's a top 50 player in that draft class in their eyes. And he's 25. But the injury history is obviously a huge concern, and I think that's, from a Bengals fan perspective, like that's an area of concern, because if he happens to go down with a third consecutive injury in as many years, you're just back to square one with Drew Sample and basically no one else. So I don't imagine that they're done at that position group. But it was interesting, obviously, because a lot of people pegged them to target Michael Mayer in the draft, and he was available with their first round pick, and they ended up passing him, and as well as every other team in the first round. Their top two tight ends on their board ended up being Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta. So if they were to trade back in the first round, or maybe to the top of the second, I think Laporta would have been arguably their main target. And that's the thing, because yes, they didn't draft a tight end for the second consecutive year. Yes, they only have Irv Smith on a 1-year deal, who's basically making a little bit more than veteran minimum. There's definitely a perception, and albeit a weighted one, that they don't value tight end very much. But I think now 2 years in a row, they've been targeting tight ends, and it just ended up being there wasn't one anywhere near the top of their board when they were picking, and that's just kind of how it went. Like, I think if Sam Laporta was by far the best player on their board, which I don't think he was that far off, he could have been their first round pick. You know, they liked some tight ends who got picked a little bit earlier in the second round, so they just ended up not taking one, right? Like the third round, you would think that, okay, that's Darnell Washington time, but they had a red flag for his medical, so it just never really aligned up for the second consecutive year for them to take a tight end. And you're right, like they've just gotten by with C.J. Uzomah, Hayden Hurst, and they're trying to do the same with Irv Smith because ultimately at the end of the day, the receivers carry this offense. But I definitely don't think they're like, oh, we're just not interested in any talented tight end, because every team would gladly take like a Travis Kelce, you know?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so instead, like you were saying, they went to defensive backfield again. Because last year they used up actually the last couple of years, they've been using high draft picks on defensive backs. And they did it again with Turner in round 2, Battle in round 3, added Ivy in round 7, talked about the signing of Nick Scott. And, you know, we'll see how that pans out. Of course, Mike Hilton was also brought onto the team too. Awuzie is still there. So the look of the backfield is a lot different, of course, with those 2 veteran safeties gone. But it does look like over the last few years, the effort to reshape it, to get younger, add a veteran or 2 to the mix is looking pretty good.
Yeah, they made a concerted effort, like you said, to just completely replenish this group. I think with 4 top 100 picks in the past couple of years, they signed a starter, or a guy they believe he can start, and Nick Scott, even though he only has 1 year of starting experience. They've been prepared to watch Jesse Bates walk out the door for, I think, a year and a half now. And that's why they took Dax Hill in the first round last year. And honestly, like, Dax Hill has an incredible upside to his profile. It's why he was a first round pick. But Jordan Battle actually has starting experience in Nick Saban's secondary for 3 years. He has a ton of snaps and a ton of production at the position. It's entirely possible that he's just a better safety out the gate than Dax Hill, but they're obviously going to give Hill every chance to start and, you know, solidify his starting job. I just wouldn't be shocked if like Jordan Battle ends up playing more than we expect as a rookie, just because they graded him as a second round player. They watched him continue to fall inexplicably in their eyes, and they're like, we just have to take him, even if we don't have a clear plan. Like, we have our 2 starters in place at safety. Even if we don't have a clear plan to get him on the field as a starter, we just need him in the locker room. We just feel that highly about him. And obviously, DJ Turner, I think he's essentially this year's Cam Taylor-Britt, where they're not really expecting him to start out of the gate. But you have Awuzie coming off of a torn ACL. You don't know for sure if he's going to be 100% by week 1. So you have a great insurance policy. A very similar player, in my opinion, to Cam Taylor-Britt last year. Brings a ton of speed, ton of explosion. Not the greatest ball skills, but a guy who's high effort. He's going to get in run defense, and he's going to be able to stick with some of the fastest receivers in the league. So you have 2 very similar cornerbacks that you can build with in the future, just because you're going to have to get cheap at some place. And like, I don't foresee them re-signing Awuzie. They obviously didn't re-sign either Von Bell or Jesse Bates. So they've properly addressed some of these long-term and short-term areas of need in the secondary for sure.
Yeah, because they don't use that, or at least they haven't used that third safety a lot. But do you think that was more because they had 2 veterans that they can count on, as opposed to this year, like you said, more likely you're going to see a mix between Battle, Hill, and Scott?
I think it's a great point, just because like you were comfortable with what Bates could do in his role. You were comfortable with what Von Bell could do in his role. Now you have Hill, Scott, and Battle, who for the most part are all pretty interchangeable with their roles. Like, maybe you want Battle maybe closer to the line of scrimmage, but I think Dax Hill can play free or strong. The same thing as with Nick Scott. And I think now that you have a defense coordinator, Lou Narumo, whose scheme is pretty, you know, it just changes every single week based off the opponent. You could have those guys switch off different roles every single week, or maybe even every single series, depending on what the offense is trying to do. So you have so much more versatility and obviously athleticism in that safety room that can best help make up such a massive loss in experience at that position.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about the offense and the 2 skill position players the team added. And I thought adding Charlie Jones, a player that we've talked about several times on our draft shows, nice little sleeper, that if he landed in the right spot, because really Charlie Jones, I mean, you talk about how fortunate he must feel. So he's at Iowa. He doesn't have the system or the quarterback, does nothing. Changes to Purdue. The system, the quarterback is there. Numbers go through the roof. He's a 4th round draft pick. If he doesn't have that, if he stays at Iowa, he probably doesn't even get drafted. So now, oh wow, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to the NFL. Do I end up with like Iowa, or do I end up like Purdue? And he ended up like Purdue and more. To be able to have Joe Burrow throwing the football to him, that's just going to make his career that much potentially more important. So I think he's definitely a player to keep an eye on, because we talked about it. Having Trenton Irwin, Trent Taylor, those guys were used a bit over the way they should have with the injury situation here or there, and they definitely needed to add another guy, and they added two, including the kid from Princeton.
It's such a great point, because like you look at a soon to be 25-year-old wide receiver who has 1 year of like major production in college. You're thinking this guy is not going to be anything more than like a special teams player in the NFL. But then you put him in an offense with a quarterback that is almost a perfect fit for what his skill set is. And obviously Joe Burrow fits with most receivers, but Charlie Jones, like he's so good at just finding the soft spots in the zone. He's a great vertical threat despite not being very big. He's great in those back shoulder plays and those back shoulder throws, which Joe Burrow loves. And if he establishes some sense of chemistry, early on, like that will only continue to grow over the next 4 years. So you're looking at a guy who, again, like he may not have the biggest upside in the world just because of how old he is, but he is a perfect fit as the future slot receiver in this offense, and he will probably never be asked to catch 110 balls in a season ever again. But he doesn't really have to, just because you have Chase and Higgins to the outside. So now going forward, assuming that they find a way to keep both Higgins and Chase, which is far from a certainty at this point, but you could potentially have three receivers that can be either they can go in the slot, they can go to the outside, and they can win on all three levels of the field. And you don't really have that right now with Tyler Boyd, just because he's more limited as a slot receiver only, as a guy who can't really stretch the field that much. So this is definitely a long-term addition for me, but obviously someone who is probably immediately your wide receiver four, can play in a pinch if you have injuries, and of course has experience and upside as a returner as well.
By the way, on Boyd is what's his status, his contract status? Do you think he's going to be around much longer?
He's got 1 year left. He's going to be 29 or 30 at the end of this year. So I expect this to be the last year that Tyler Boyd's a Bengal.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to be a scout for the Princeton receiver, but what did the team, what did the coaches and the scouts say? What did they like about this kid and why they wanted him on the team?
I actually do have a scouting report from Princeton. It says he's fast, and he is fast. He's a long strider, obviously, great in the vertical game. He took a 2-day visit with the Bengals, and I think that was pretty indicative. Okay, the interest here is pretty serious, and like he just checks all the character boxes too. Like he was an Ivy League student. He was an MVP at another sport aside from football. He was a decathlon athlete at Princeton, and he just whatever he did, he excelled. And I think that is a testament to just a phenomenal work ethic. Obviously, you have to have incredible time management skills to handle an Ivy League academic schedule while also being a team captain for the football team that apparently only lost like 5 games in 4 years while he was there. So he's experienced to winning. He's experienced to just taking on a lot of things at once. And for a guy who's going to have a tremendous learning curve going from the Ivy League to the NFL, that's going to be important. So I don't expect him to be anything more than like a gunner on special teams this year, and he's going to be a really effective one at that size and speed and everything. But going forward, you could see like a potential role player as a receiver who maybe gets like 10, 15 snaps a game.
And then of course you just hope anytime you land guys like that, you hope that you have that diamond in the rough and he can develop. Obviously there'll be time for him to develop and go from there. So because our lads actually had him graded as a potential 4th rounder. So to be able to get him in the 6th was definitely a good get. So now we talk about the other skill position, because this one is a little bit more important too, and that's running back. Of course, P. Ryan's gone. No word yet on Zeke, right? No update on Zeke. So Chase Brown comes in as the 5th rounder, and he's going to have a really good opportunity as of right now. But all depends on whether or not you think that they're going to stand pat or this is it.
I think it's safe to say they're going to stand pat. Like, I definitely wouldn't rule out them trying to get a pay cut out of Joe Mixon. Like, I don't think that's dead in the water. But I think if they do offer him that, I think he'll accept it just because he realizes this is still the best place for him, and they still need some. They probably need a little bit more space if they want to fit both Higgins and Burrow under the cap with the extensions that they want to do this year. But yeah, Chase Brown is an ideal replacement for Samaje Perine. I don't really expect him to ever be more than like an RB2.
Sure.
But I don't think he'll ever really have to be anything more than that in the Bengals system. And I think with what he was doing at Illinois, like he was pass protecting more than pretty much every other running back in college football. He was definitely imperfect at it, but he's got the experience. So you have to think that, like, for any running back, obviously going to the NFL, it's going to be tough to kind of acclimate yourself in that role. But he at least has the experience and the willingness to do it. But he's got an incredible vision. He's got incredible balance. The only real negative to his game right now is just ball security, and maybe that's just a product of carrying the ball like 3,000 times in his last year at Illinois. So hopefully that kind of gets ironed out. But just from an athleticism standpoint, like he can break off long runs. And he just always picks the right gap, and he rarely goes down off first contact, both things that the Bengals sorely needed at running back. It wouldn't shock me if he outsnaps Joe Mixon by the season's end, just because you can probably do more with him as a pass protector, and he still has a decent ability as a receiver, but he looks really good on film, and I think that's really good value in the fifth round.
So what you're saying is you think that the Bengals are happy with their running back room now, that Chase Brown is going to be their number 2, and they're going to go with Mixon and Brown.
Yeah, and I think Trayvon Williams, like, he's still going to be in the conversation. He's definitely going to be, at worst, the third running back. They might actually give him the opportunity to be Mixon's backup out of the gate, but I think there's much greater upside with Brown. You could probably do more with him compared to Williams.
What did happen to Williams? I remember when he came out, I thought he was a sleeper to keep an eye on, being a 6th-round draft pick. I know he's had some injuries. Is that really it? Or is it just, is there some other reason why he just never... I mean, he's been around for a while. It's been, 5 years? This would be his 5th year. So, what's been holding him back?
I'm not really sure. I think it's just because Perine kind of got there at the same time. Like, Perine was signed when Williams was rookie, so they weren't really going to give Williams a big role as a rookie anyways. And then Perine kind of just ran with the RB2 role while Williams was still developing. I think they still like Trayvon Williams. They re-signed him this year. So I think they see this as an opportunity now to just say, you've had 4 years of developing here. When you've been on the field, you've been pretty good, but you just haven't really had that opportunity. This is your opportunity to kind of seize hold of a larger role than you had in the past. And he was already he was their kickoff returner last year, so they were entrusting him to do more things. Again, I don't foresee him out snapping Chase Brown, but I guess it wouldn't shock me,
By the way, Chase Brown, as far as our lads could have gone, they had him graded as a potential 3rd-round draft pick. So, you can see why our lads, I'm sure, felt that the Bengals did a really good job of selecting the players when they did. All right. Now, there were a couple other players. Now, because we didn't talk, I know we talked about the defensive backfield, but Ivy, the DB from Miami, is he basically is it more of, all right, just he's a depth DB, hopefully down the road, special teams kind of guy, or is there something more that we're not seeing?
I doubt there's something more, to be honest with you. Like, he's long, he's experienced, and he's fast, but it's a deep cornerback group already. Like, I think the 6 who are likely to make the roster are, they're already on the roster right now, and I don't think Ivy's one of them. I foresee him being a practice squad candidate unless injuries occur.
All right, so I have to, of course, I got to talk to you about one other draft pick before we move on, and that's Robbins. I don't understand, and that's why you're here, part of the reason, but I don't understand what's the problem with Drew Chrisman? Because he was a very good kicker in college. Loved him at college. Got the chance to play last year. Looked to me like he did a decent job. Enough that, all right, you did a decent enough job. It's your job for your full-time job in 2023. Well, not so fast, because we're going to draft Brad Robbins. So what is it that they don't like about or trust about Chrisman? Or do they just feel that, oh, wow, we got a chance to get this kid Robbins. We still have a pick. Let's take him. He's just too good for us to pass up.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. Like, Robbins, I think to most people is one of the few draftable specialists in this class. And I think he was probably a better college punter than Chrisman was at OSU. The thing with Chrisman, and this goes back to last year, he was competing with Kevin Huber to be the punter. And he was out kicking Huber in training camp in terms of distance, but Huber still had the advantage in terms of which direction he was punting and the overall hang time, which is why Huber actually won the competition to start the year out. But then obviously Huber is, unfortunately, he's 40 years old, so his leg kind of gave out as the year went on. So then they added Crispin to the roster, and you saw like a difference. Okay, this guy's booming the ball and he's kicking it like 50 yards down the field, but it's only in the air for 3.8 seconds. So the gunners aren't getting down there in time. It's leading to these returns that shouldn't have happened, and he wasn't getting the direction down either. So he didn't end the year very well. Like, he had a bad punt in the AFC Championship game that unfortunately helped the Chiefs end up getting that game-winning field goal. So Robbins brings much more hang time with the same amount of power, I would assume, and I think that will probably give him the edge over Crispin.
So Crispin, bottom line is, this is an opportunity. Even if he has a really good camp, more than likely he's going to be somebody that will be available to another team. So,
yeah,
I mean, they could keep another punter. They did it last 2 years, but that's because they had a veteran. So, kind of hard to keep two punters. Even though you could put him on the practice squad, I guess, see if a team picks him up. But that's punting. We could talk about some other things on this show. By the way, does Charlie Brown, we put him on the Arlette has him as far as the depth chart as the number one punt and kick returner. Do you think that's going to be the case? Do you think he is going to be given the opportunity right away, or are they jumping the gun?
No, it's definitely part of the reason why they drafted him. There's a story at Purdue's Pro Day, like it was like rainy and cold, and everyone was kind of inside in their indoor facility. And Darren Simmons, the Bengals special teams coordinator, said, "Get this guy out there in the elements. I want to see him like return like 50 or so punts." And he did it willingly, and he did it pretty successfally. So at minimum, he's going to be the punt returner. I think he overtakes Trent Taylor for that role. We'll see if he overtakes Trevion Williams as the kickoff returner. But I think that was where he had. That was where Jones had the most success as like the Big Ten Specialist of the Year in 2021 as a kickoff returner. So he might end up being both.
Okay. And as far as the UDFAs, the one player that just sticks out to me, because I know he had a pretty good career on the offensive line at Washington, was Jackson Kirkland. Matter of fact, we talked about it on our shows like 2 or 3 years ago. If you looked at one of those early, it might have been like, say, 2020 or 2021. Let's take a look at it's September. Let's take a look at the mock draft that year. Jackson Kirkland could have been a first-round draft pick. That's how highly regarded he was at that time. Unfortunately, he's had some injuries, and for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked out. But, hey, they were able to sign him, not draft him. So are you hearing anything about whether or not this is just another guy or somebody that they really like?
I mean, and you can corroborate with this, like, because I've only known him for as long as when they signed him, and apparently, like, he was entering the last year's draft, and he went back because of an injury, right? So he comes into the league pretty old, but like you said, there's a lot of good tape on him from Washington, mainly at guard, and I think because he's going to probably play guard, that gives him a great chance to make the team, just because there is practically zero depth along the entire interior offensive line for the Bengals. Like, you have Alex Kappa, you have Cordell Volson. They re-signed Max Sharping to a 1-year deal, but I don't think Max Sharping is good enough to fend off a UDFA who's definitely worth it. So Kirkland has a phenomenal chance to actually make this team. It's just a matter of how he ends up doing in training camp. And Ben Brown, who was the UDFA from last year, he ended up, I think, tearing his pectoral, but he was a good guy from Ole Miss and he could have been drafted. He also has a good chance of maybe overtaking like Trey Hill as the backup center. So both those guys who were former undrafted picks, I think have good chances of cracking the 53.
Any other UDFAs that you've heard good things about, or is Kirkland the top guy?
Kirkland's probably the top guy. Like, I haven't heard a ton of things about the rest of the class. It's not even like officially signed yet. Excuse me. But Devonta Maxwell, who's a 3 technique from Chattanooga, just because, again, the depth of that position for the Bengals is very minimal, and he was very productive. So he's another guy to watch out for.
Okay, I will do that. And overall, fans, happy regarding the draft?
Yeah, why not?
Of course.
Like, I think the average grade that I've seen from just people in the communities are about a B plus. And again, it's that combination of, okay, recognizing that the defense eventually has to get cheaper because you're paying your offensive players so much. So they've prepared with Miles Murphy maybe taking over for Trey Hendrickson in a couple years, DJ Turner taking over for Chidobe Awuzie. You have Jordan Battle, who could maybe even start this year at safety, but that's another long-term play. But there was a recognition that you need to get faster, you need to get quicker with your complementary pieces on offense, and Jones is a great guy for that. Yosevitz, even if he doesn't contribute, is a great guy for that. Chase Brown immediately is your RB2 and a high-end upside guy at that. So even if there wasn't a tight end, even if there wasn't an offensive line drafted, I think this draft was the overall success of the Bengals, even if it wasn't in like any home run picks, but it's still like an above average class, I think.
And is there, if you had to look at a whole, like every team has them, even after free agency and the draft, we got to take care of that next offseason. That's we can't fill all the holes. Is there one particular part of this team that you still think is the biggest question?
Yeah, for like next year, like in terms of that, like we don't know what right tackle is even right now. Like we think it's Jonah Williams, but he needs to come back from injury and he needs to actually make that position change. If not, it's Jackson Carman, who again you don't know if he's going to be competent there either. So both those guys, like they're probably not in like the confirmed plans for next year. And then at defensive tackle, DJ Reader's entering his contract year. You have like we're kind of in agreement about Zach Carter. I don't really have a ton of confidence in him ever developing into a starter. So you need something behind BJ Hill. You need more explosion at that position. So I think both defensive tackle and offensive tackle next year are going to be big needs.
Were the fans or anyone in general, analysts, were they surprised at all that the Bengals did not add a draft pick on the offensive line?
Yeah, I think when DeJuan Jones was falling, people expected the Bengals to kind of pick up on him. He was in for a visit, and I think they had their eyes on him in the 4th round, but he ended up getting taken by the Cleveland Browns there. So there was some surprise, but I think guys like me and Joe Goodberry and other guys in the community, we kind of got the sense that if they're not going to get one of these top guys like an Anton Harrison in the 1st and 2nd round or something like that, they're probably not going to address it. It just doesn't really fall in line with what the strength of the draft is and what their other needs are. So it wasn't the biggest shock.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I mean, we talked about it, how strange it might feel to outside fans that, I thought they had a really bad offensive line, and that's the issue. And how do they not draft an offensive lineman? But the thing was, when you looked at it towards the end of the year compared to the beginning of the year, things got a little bit better, if not a lot better. But then to add Orlando Brown Jr., of course, and then you look at it, you go, yeah, if you have Jonah Williams, and you do have La'el Collins as a backup, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. So you really looked at it, and you were like, yeah, you know what? The offensive line is actually not as bad as people think.
Yeah, and when they signed Orlando Brown, like in their minds, they're thinking, okay, this is easy. Jonah Williams is going to slide over to right tackle, and you're going to have your 5 starters who are all veterans who, I mean, aside from Orlando Brown, have all been in the system. When that curveball of Jonah requesting the trade came out, like there was uncertainty of, are they going to trade him? Do they need another option there? And I think they were, at least contemplating trading him, but obviously an offer never really came through that was to their liking. So in their mind, like this is an upgraded offensive line because Orlando Brown is a better left tackle than Jonah Williams, and Jonah Williams is probably a better right tackle than what they had last year, right tackle.
Yes.
So in their mind, they did enough.
Okay, so before I let you go, I have to ask you, since the timing is right, about the schedule release yesterday. What did you think? What did the fans think? What sticks out the most?
It's a little similar to last year where the first half, I guess the part before the bye is considerably easier than the second half, even though there's no like real obvious stretch like, oh, this is a stretch where the Bengals have to take advantage because like it's a pretty middle of the road schedule. I think it's like ranked 15th in terms of actual strength of schedule. There's the week 7 bye, but following that bye, you have like the 49ers and the Bills. You have 4 primetime games and whatnot spread throughout the schedule. So I don't think there was any strong takeaways. It's more or less like, hey, like there's some winnable games before the bye week. The Bengals need to come out strong, unlike the last 2 years when they've kind of come out the gate sluggish, to avoid needing to go on these second half runs that they're accustomed to doing. So, yeah, I think it was a pretty balanced schedule overall.
Yeah, I'm just taking a run through it as well. So, all right, so the Browns, as you said, so first and last. So that's got to be kind of neat, playing the Browns week 1. And then the Ravens back-to-back. Yeah.
They haven't played the Browns week 1, I think, since 2011, so that's definitely new.
Yeah, and then there are some winnable games there, all depending, because I never go into this. I will never do a schedule prediction, unless like somebody demands me to do it because they think we're going to get a certain amount of viewers, and even that better be a lot because I just think it's the silliest thing in the world, especially in the NFL, when you don't know from year to year how these teams are going to be and how injuries impact it. But overall, like you said, it does look like it's okay. It's average. It's not. I mean, the Bills, would the Bills be considered that? Oh, they got the Bills and the Chiefs. Now, I was thinking about that Chiefs game, and I was like, man, they are awfully close to playing that game towards the end of the year. It's a dangerously close game, to where, most of the time everybody's starting. The week, whatever that would be, 17, I guess, the 16th game. But it's just dangerous. And plus, because the playoffs are just 2 weeks away, maybe they play each other in the first. So I don't know. I wish they would have played the Chief game a little bit earlier in the year.
It's become a tradition to play the Chiefs later in the year. Like that first meeting back in 2021, I believe, was also in week 17. And obviously they played in the playoffs twice. So I think the NFL realizes that, whenever those two teams play at that point of the year, it's typically pretty competitive. It's been 3-point games all 4 times. Yeah. So I guess they went with if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Primetime games. You got that Bills game. How many other primetime games you got?
They got the Rams on Monday night, week 3. They got the Ravens Thursday night, week 11, and the Jaguars week 13 on Monday night.
So 4 total as of now. That's about right. Okay. All right, so that's going to do it, John. Appreciate it as always. Again, want to remind all you Bengal fans out there to check out the Our Lads website for this. The draft guide still available. The draft review guide is going to come out in a couple of months. John and I will hopefully be talking again right before training camp and preseason to get everybody ready for the start of not only that time period, but of course the regular season. So John, appreciate it. What's your schedule now in the off season for your programs?
Pretty much the same as usual. We just have a show once a week for the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and also on the #1 Bengals podcast. Both you can find on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to read my stuff, head to a2csports.com/Cincinnati.
Appreciate it, John. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Greg.